Seems it finally works. Hello and good morning to you, to those who have managed to come from the coffee table and especially after the splendid party of yesterday's. It's an honor to us. I welcome you on behalf of the Baltic Rim project, who has organized this session. So the Baltic Rim project is actually a project that tries to integrate maritime cultural heritage into maritime spatial planning in the Baltic Sea region. So yes, this is a session organized by a sector. I am Matthias Maluk. I'm representing the lead partner of this project, the State Archaeology Department of the German federal state of Schleswig-Holstein. But actually, the moderator will be Jacek Zaucha, professor at the University of Gdansk, and many of you, I think, will know him already. So, Jacek, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Matthias. Well, I'm also happy seeing all of you here. So my first question is, please raise your hands if you have, a feeling that sea is important for us. We have some kind of emotional attachments. Yeah, so it's the right workshop for you. Great. Well, we'll use Screenio, so please look on the address and try to log in, because we are a little bit innovative about Screenio, because we want to use it for giving to the project some hints about the good practices. So there are 2 questions open there, and please, during our presentation, try to answer, because it will help us in thinking. So we'll have 3 presentations from various parts of our Europe with different experiences. So the first one will be about some case studies by Arturo. The second by Mari Pohja Mikra will be about integrating culture into the MSP. And the third one will be about the experience of the Baltic Rim project by Salamaria Tikkanen. And then, during this, please give your hints to those 2 questions. Then panel will follow. Okay? Yeah, I will repeat the link with pleasure. So please look on the link. Please log in. So that's a normal stuff, but with W11. Okay? And try to help us in finding good practices, good solution, interesting solutions, something very innovative. Yeah? So Lara, if you do it for Russia, you will have an extra coffee from me. Okay, so you have those 2 questions. Okay, so now we can start with presentation. So I want to invite Arturo, and and we'll try to, please.
Yes.
You have a first food for thought.
Let's see how it goes. And is it here? Yeah. Okay.
No, it's not working.
Just on this. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Arturo da Silva. I'm a maritime archaeologist, and I work with in UNESCO for a long time, specifically in the Secretariat of the UNESCO 2001 Convention on the Protection of Underwater Cultural Heritage, and at the same time building up capacities in different regions for countries and stakeholders to be able to study and protect underwater cultural heritage. Currently, I'm doing some research in the Spanish School of Archaeology. That's why you see my affiliation there. I would like to thank all the organizers. Thank you for the invitation to the Baltic Rim project. I think this is one of the most interesting things. Probably all of you are thinking, when you are thinking about underwater archaeology or maritime archaeology, you are thinking about shipwrecks, about treasures, about treasure hunting also, no? All these things that media are sending to you. But I hope with my presentation to show you that maritime archaeology and maritime cultural heritage goes further beyond that. No, it's much more than that. When I started seeing how maritime cultural heritage has been taken into account for developing projects. I got astonished that there is not that much. There is in the scientific literature, in the literature by international organizations and governments, cultural heritage is not really taken much into account when talking about MSPs, for instance. In the organization I used to work with, UNESCO and IOC, for instance, cultural heritage is something that is being taken into account quite recently when working specifically with the cultural sector. So I think it's this Western mentality in which we put institutions in different parts, that and the water cultural heritage took, different ways to the look that we do to the sea. So just taking you to the origins of the approach to maritime archaeology, we can go back to the beginning of the 20th century when several discoveries, even before in the 19th century, but in the 20th century actually many different discoveries in Greece, in Turkey, all the places, fascinated the archaeologists and academics, and the water archaeology started its way, especially to build up different scientific methods to collect all the data that we find into the sea from these objects. I mean, the marvels that were studied at the time were specifically objects, sculptures, the cargo of those sites that were found. But underwater archaeology is much more than that. We have different sites, and the discipline of maritime cultural heritage evolved from those objects to take into account shipwrecks, the whole different context that compound shipwrecks, the hold, the cargo, but also taking into account the cultural links to the harbors, the port, the people that were involved in the trade, etc., and also to sunken cities. They were looking at how cultural heritage is somehow linked to nature and is responding to this interaction between society and nature and society and other societies in a specific natural environment. No? In the pictures that we see here, for instance, we see different sites in Roman villas underwater. We here see a sunken city in Port Royal in Jamaica, Colombia, etc., etc. But we also go from there to look into the wider context of maritime cultural landscapes. What we see in the pictures are prehistoric submerged forests that had also some prehistorical human settlements. So we are talking about 20,000 years ago, and this is right there. This is in the intertidal zone, in the connection between land and sea, or many places that are sunk. This is telling us quite a lot about how humans, different parts of our history, were dealing with different natural events and different resources in the sea. No? This is in Wales, and that's what tells us that maritime cultural heritage is also embedded into the natural environment. We cannot take one without the other, and I'm happy to see in the presentations I saw yesterday how many of the environmental impact assessments are taking into account cultural heritage. That has been something normal in Europe, but it's not that in many other places because of the lack of capacity. So this goes to maritime cultural heritage. Why is important to protect it? As I said, maritime archaeology doesn't only tell us about our past. It tells us about how things were constructed, how they were used, but also it tells us about our way of thinking about the past, our cosmogony, how people used to see the world in past society. But it also tells us how historically, different societies with different problematics, environmental problematics, or the uses and exploitation of the sea resources were dealing with them. And that cumulative effect had arrived to our days. Now, that's one of the important things of cultural heritage, is that connects, as I say, the land and sea together to embrace the totality of the potential space affected by human maritime action. And it's one of the important things why maritime cultural heritage has to be inserted into MSPs. It has to be one of the key elements that transversally to other sectors helps making sustainable decisions. It was a failure maybe on the drafters of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development to put culture itself as one of the main pillars of sustainable development. On one side, probably maritime archaeologists and maritime cultural heritage practitioners were looking more into the interpretation and narratives of the past of the resource than looking on how that cultural resource could help developing policies in the future. But now, from the last years, that many of the data sets that have been collected have many things in common with other data sets from different other industries, we can see that different future strategies for development can be developed thanks to those strategies. But this resource is under threat, and is more under threat now that the trends of blue economy and blue growth are expanding into the sea. And if we don't do something, we will lose in exploitation that we all know. Others that are linked to the lack of capacities and the lack of legal protective frameworks, etc., are diminishing this resource, and we have to take it into account. In the pictures you see the attention of governments already in the 60s and 70s saying that legal frameworks needed to be applied internationally for the protection of underwater cultural heritage. Underwater cultural heritage is not only linked to terrestrial waters, we can find it in the international waters. That's why you need to have a common language to protect that heritage that is outside. And that is how we come different legal instruments, like from the United Nations Law of the Sea, with 2 articles that dealt with objects of historical and archaeological value, and then the Council of Europe, then ICOMOS with a chart on scientific standards, and then eventually we get to UNESCO that in the year 2001 approved a convention specifically dealing with the protection of underwater cultural heritage. This convention, I'm not going to go into detail into the convention, is something that you can read in the website, but gives a definition for underwater cultural heritage, links this definition and this resource to cultural and natural context, so nature and culture is together into it, and gives a series of provisions to states to protect heritage within a cooperation scheme, talking about in situ preservation, etc. One of the main things probably is in Article 5 that says that the states shall take all measures that they have at their disposals to avoid or mitigate actions that incidentally affect underwater cultural heritage. This is to say that one of those best appropriate means is MSP. And that's how many of the state parties of the UNESCO 2001 Convention are using MSPs to address these obligations under Article 5 of the 2001 Convention. But the Convention only has 61 states. It's increasing, it's going slow, but there are other instruments like the UNESCO World Heritage Convention that is worldwide ratified, and then it gives obligations to states to protect all heritage, even in territorial waters, and to integrate the protection of that heritage into comprehensive planning programs. I'm not going to go into detail into that. Looking for different cases that I won't be able to present in a wider sense today, because the different case studies that you find in Africa or Latin America, or the places where I've been working the most, you can see that MSP processes are starting, but that underwater maritime cultural heritage are not integrated. Why is that? Well, sometimes they only have some dots, some of the major sites that they are very well known in the States, but it's mainly because the cultural competent authorities, they don't have the capacities, the infrastructure, or they haven't started the inventories. So either they have a seat on the tables. I was talking just with the girl from Michelle, the presenter from IOC, the project they had between Ecuador and Peru in the north on the MSP process they are doing together in a transboundary sense. And yes, they invite the cultural authorities on the table, but as they haven't developed the inventories and they don't know specifically with the potential sites, well, I mean, they cannot provide the information that is needed for planners in order to put not only dots, but create areas of vulnerability that can affect cultural heritage, either underwater or in the society itself. Some of the examples that we find eventually is they are linked to different World Heritage sites because they are obliged to create different zoning places where all activities in the sea are regulated and heritage is inserted. For instance, the one we see in the picture is the different mapping on Southern Lagoon area in Palau, where underwater cultural heritage is inserted together with natural heritage, but it's only linked to exercises in World Heritage. So there is much more things that are needed to do at other scales. We see, for instance, in China, how MSPs are processing, and cultural heritage, they have a huge institution for underwater cultural heritage, but it's not taken into account in the MSPs, only in some cases where it's very sensitive politically wise. The same for other places. In Mexico, mainly only shipwrecks, but the underwater and maritime heritage of indigenous communities that are in the Yucatan Peninsula, for instance, they are being left behind of the understanding of MSP. So this knowledge that has the society and the different stakeholders that are living in the place sometimes are left behind. Sometimes we take into account only underwater archaeology, tangible shipwrecks and things that have been in research, but we are forgetting about intangible links to those. What happened in international waters? Well, I mean, that's one of the main difficulties. Just mentioning that there is this case within the 2001 Convention for the international waters that is between Tunisia and Italy. There's an area that is being declared with several shipwrecks, and all the countries that are around that area in the Mediterranean have declared their interest to create a special maritime archaeological zone, and where all the things are regulated. They are looking into the MSP's steps guidelines in order to create here a specific regime that is approved by all the countries around for the activities, because it's also a very important fishing place. I think I'm going slower than I thought. Well, one of the main problems is that absent from the MSPs. No? What we can see is, I said, there is in the countries that there are not capacities, there is a huge dependence of international organizations and also NGOs and international experts, for instance. It's one of the things that happen with UNESCO when it's being called upon to do some expert missions and helping doing surveys in certain areas. They provide this information to the governments, but they are not able to verify or to use it further beyond that for the inventories. Then you have other foundations and institutions like the Honor Trust Foundation that is working mainly in the Arab countries to help the governments and competent authorities to create the capacities to have maritime cultural heritage inserted into developing plans, at the same as there's a project Rising from the Depths that is working in East Africa. So you have some examples of different private and international organizations doing the work that some of the countries can do and trying to help in the development of the MSPs. On this line, and talking also about the 2030 UN agenda, I was told to mention a bit more of this platform. When the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development was approved and designed for 2021 and 2030, cultural heritage was basically absent of the definitions and the different challenges that the decade wanted to achieve. Eventually, different maritime archaeologists were lobbying to insert maritime archaeology because it's one of the main issues for oceans. We cannot do development without having culture, as I said. And in the kickoff meeting that happened in the National Museum of Denmark, there was a specific part on cultural heritage, and different stakeholders from maritime archaeologists to cultural heritage, to marine spatial planners, ocean scientists, etc., created this network, the Ocean Decade Heritage Network. This network aims at raising awareness in the broader cultural community about the decade and try also to provide a platform to information exchange and to connect all the stakeholders that are related or have some influence on the different policies protecting or studying underwater cultural heritage. So it's a place of communication to encourage further research into how to insert underwater cultural heritage into developing process, and I welcome you all to join it. One of the leitmotifs, let's say, that moves this platform is that without cultural heritage, we cannot really do sustainable development, we cannot deliver the decade. It's not how cultural heritage can contribute, that obviously is something that we put into the table, but the main thing is with our culture, without that makes us ourselves, we cannot look into the future. I invite you to look into the that link, there is a place where you can put, you can join, you can share your news, you can share your events, and there are meetings and different activities in which all the people related to the oceans that care about heritage itself look and get together to speak the same language. In that sense, some of the studies, this summarizes a bit all what I said and more, because I could stay here talking about the importance of maritime and cultural heritage on sustainable development for ages, but maritime cultural heritage joins together different pillars of sustainable development within the environment itself. One is policy, one is community itself, and industry, that all have in the sea space their own interests. They contribute to different SDGs, as you can see there, and also the data sets that you can collect for underwater cultural heritage sites. They are in synergies with many other data sets that you have on other industries like oil and gas industries, bathymetric, geophysical surveys, etc. But they are not shared, they are not common. Sometimes they are not even in the same time of softwares. So that's why you need to somehow everybody get them together and trying to collaborate in that sense. Just to finalize some considerations that for you to take into account for the debate, we will have a space later for questions. I talked already about the importance of the historical perspective that is given by maritime heritage in order to provide and address actions and issues that we have nowadays to create future actions. I talk at the same time about the importance of the international frameworks, legal frameworks that are helping us to make synergies and to integrate cultural heritage into the comprehensive planning programs. Well, all the other ones. The important thing maybe also is that we need innovation. As our colleagues said before, we need innovation, we need new ways into looking into integrating cultural heritage. That's why Baltic Rim project is one of the main initiatives that is pointing in that direction and is leading the creation of models on how to integrate cultural heritage into MSPs. And with that, I think I finish, and we'll have time for questions later. So I thank you all very much.
Thank you. Big applause to Arturo. Yeah, it's a very nice link. You know, he said about experience which is existing, but which still is not sufficient, according to what we can hear. And I'm looking on the screen here, and there is only one example. So I cannot believe that there is no other example in this global meeting of integrating underwater cultural heritage. Jan, you are not doing it in Sweden? Please, go to Skrinio. Kira, you have such a big knowledge. Go with examples. Yeah, we need examples, because we'll be much happier, and we hope that we will inspire you by telling that it's really important issue. So we'll come back to our presenter with the panel, and now will be a second presentation on innovative way of integrated cultural heritage. So Maria from Finland, she started yesterday with showing MSP in Finland, and now I hope we'll have inspiration how we, planners, we can take into consideration this cultural dimension, not only heritage, but more broadly cultural dimension. Maria, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. It's my pleasure to be here. Good morning to everyone. I have a very practical approach to the cultural heritage and how we try to integrate it into our MSP process in Finland. I was just listening Arturo's speech, and I thought that I don't even have the terms at hand in a way. So it might be very clear after my presentation that we need collaboration between the expertise from the cultural heritage and between the planners. So, but it's a pleasure to explain what we have done in Finland in the national official MSP process and in the Pan-Baltic scope project we had these past 2 years. Just shortly show you the infograph of the Finnish planning system. We have 11 themes we have to consider in more detail, and cultural heritage is one of those. We know that these things go hand in hand kind of resource-wise with the tourism, recreational stuff, but still we wanted to handle this as its own theme. We don't have a national authority or agency responsible for our MSP process, but we have 8 regional councils, coastal regional councils that are responsible for drafting our MSPs. And they are doing it together, but we have 3 different plans, and you can see the division between how we kind of share our sea areas among those 8 coastal regional councils. And we plan for both of we plan from the shoreline to the EEC, and this is our first round that we are doing, and then we will be finalizing our plans by March 21. So it's a really hectic process at the moment. When we started our process 2017, it was very clear that we have to start from scratch, trying to find out what we already know and what is the data we still need in order to make a good plan. So we kind of had the baseline review that contained the elements of the ecological stuff and the blue growth stuff and also the cultural stuff. We contacted the Finnish Heritage Agency because we didn't have expertise to do that, and asked them whether you could provide us a few pages, the most important ones, what we should know, what are the essential terms, and then we will figure out how to integrate into the MSP process. They sent us a report that was some 100 pages, and we were very happy about that. And that is because we have a lot of information. We have a lot of GIS information, open data, and they openly share it with us. And it was a good place to start. And they did this, they gathered the information between the covers, and it covered all the 3 planning areas. So it was a really easy task in a way for us as planners to continue from there. So just some content of the report is that what is very characteristic to Finland is that first we had the marine coastal culture. It's good to know that in Finland we have this long history of small-scale coastal fisheries, and it's really important for us. And it builds the huge heritage for us, and that's something we also consider in our MSP process. We don't put value only on societal importance, but we put value on the community importance. So it's in MS process, it's not just the national priorities, but we have the regional goals, and we want to have a very lively coastal fishing culture in Finland. So this is a big issue in MSP. And then we have these national landscapes and nationally valuable marine landscapes. And lighthouses, as you can see in the picture, is something very characteristic to Finnish conditions, because we have very shallow and rocky shoreline. And there was a historical saying that we had to have lighthouses so that wherever you were near the coast, you had to see at least one light, because it was impossible to be on the sea otherwise. And then we have excellent GIS data about the underwater cultural heritage. This is the figure provided by the Finnish Heritage Agency about the hotspots of the called underwater heritage things. And we have what is something unique for us, that we have a lot of timber industry and sawmills, and they built these next to the coast, so there's a lot of stuff underwater and very interesting landscapes over there. And then this intangible marine cultural heritage. I know that the picture is nothing like that. It's very tangible. I'd say that, we have pictures on the rocks, and it tells stories about the old times, but it's still, especially related to the small-scale local fishing, we have the own language, we have the own words for that culture, and we have the web-based data where you can search the language and the words that we are missing if we don't take care of these practices. Well, sorry, there's something wrong. We had some problem with my presentation before, but I will put it like this. Sorry. there's something, I made a new presentation, but for some reason it's not here. So I try to cope with this old one. What we did in the Pan-Baltic Scope project during these past 2 years is that we collected data about the meaningful places in the sea area and coastal area. And what we had is that we had 5 teams. We collected the emotional bonds, emotional things on the sea area, about the relation creation, and then I have to be very creative here about the livelihood stuff, and then conflicting interest, whether there are some of those. And we had a good data, and we started to interpret it. And we try to, the very important thing in the space planning is that where it is spatially, and for who it is important place, and why. We got excellent narratives that we interpret it, and what is happening, and why is this. And for example, in the case of this leisure time and recreation, we could see that there was some 4% of the respondents that tell us that there are some cultural values that should be considered. It wasn't a big deal because the leisure time and recreation is more about all those activities you can imagine you can do on the coastline. But then MSP-wise, what is needed to maintain it? So what we have to do we want to conflict the situation? Do we have to take consideration of the emotions towards the places? I'm really sorry. I had nice maps here, and now I don't have them. But I just want to tell you, I had a map about the emotional bonds, because that is very unique data. And we could show that there was, when we ask people to mark the emotionally important places, meaningful places, there was some 13% of them marked cultural things. A little bit more about the nature values, but cultural things. And same in Satakunta region, this is the Western Coast, one of the regional councils responsible for MSP, and in Åland Islands. And there were some significant differences between the data, actually, and for some reason in Åland, they found more these cultural and natural values. I won't go into that. What is the reason for that? That is something we should think further, but that difference is there. And then we had this, when we classified the emotions and what kind of things, there was a lot of tight connections to the memories. In fact, we had a positive correlation between these memories and whatever stuff you do with the families, with the emotional bond in the place, and the cultural, with the cultural features that were present in the data. And that's really important if you think about this. This is place attachment, the emotional bond between people and places, and there's some sense of place. And I am pretty sure if we look at the data, or if we'd have another kind of question, we could also reveal some kind of psychological ownership. You know, that is one of the things that you can find in any natural resource conflict, that people hold a strong ownership feelings towards places, and it's good to notice that the cultural values that people have are actually very emotional bonds. That is something I wanted to show you, but sorry about this hassle. So I won't go into that. You know how heat maps come. They have very raw data is about polygons in a map, and then you just try to show how it forms. But this is something we've done with all these themes, and we also check the cultural issues from all this data. Then about the official MSP process, we had this future scenarios work. You've seen a short pitch talk about this really important phase of our MSP process, where we didn't try to forecast, or we didn't even try to find the most likely future, but just to broaden our thinking and whatever might happen in the future and how we should prepare ourselves. And actually, cultural heritage was one of the themes we had. I won't go into that, but we had a kind of scenarios for the whole, like nationally for 2015. And then we had scenarios for all themes and in all planning areas, all 3 planning areas. This is one of the planning areas in southwest Finland, and the scenario 2 that is named as profitability under environmental terms. This is something that when you check the cultural things, heritage, what happens to it was almost everything. There was a connection to the kind of recreational things and tourism, and whatever happens there affects also the cultural things. And this scenario is built so that it spreads the activities along the coast. And then we had the impact assessment, and we could see that how it affects on, for example, people's well-being. And whenever we saw that, the better the people felt, and whether their lives were better, the better was exactly the cultural heritage situation with the cultural heritage. And the resources were put into that direction. So now, at this moment, we are in the phase that we left these scenarios behind, and it was our place for us to choose what kind of future we want to have. And we've done this process together with the stakeholders from start to the end. It was stakeholders that told us what kind of future we might have in the scenario phase, and now about the vision phase, what kind of future they want and what kind of steps we have to take to reach that point. And at this point, we are in the middle of workshop series where we are showing these 3D models to the stakeholders on the tables with pens and post-its. They are figuring out what are the very practical approaches considering this theme. We have, for example, this cultural heritage. In what zones we have these zones for inner archipelago, outer archipelago, and open sea, where it happens and what is needed to maintain this. What are the important land-sea interactions we have to consider? And we talked about the nowadays situation, but we also talk about the future. If we want to reach the vision and the target we set regionally or nationally, what are the steps we have to make? And there's a lot of information in Finnish, but it tells the kind of what we already know, what kind of inventory we've done already. This is a really practical way of involving and engaging the stakeholders to ponder what it might be, and kind of, in a way, we have a common understanding with the stakeholders, all planners and stakeholders, what is needed and what is the well, how to go from there, what is needed in order to have a very lively cultural heritage also in the future. So this was short. I just wanted to underline that we see maritime cultural heritage as a resource in MSP. I was informed yesterday that it also has an instinct value, and I in a way, I agree, that's true. But this is something we humans have made, and we have responsibility to keep it in a good shape, so to say. So that's one of the main tasks of our MSP process. Thank you.
Thank you. Big applause. It's so interesting to see that MSP is such diverse, even in the Baltic Sea region. So here, great example, you know, looking from MSP perspective to this cultural issue, broad cultural issue. Great inspiration. And now there will be a set, thank you very much, and we'll come back to those issues during the panel. And now the set presentation. So Maria will present the overview of treating this cultural issue, which was done during the Baltic Rim project. So Baltic Rim experience, how countries are dealing with all those issues. Maria, please.
Okay.
Sara Maria, please go ahead.
Yes, I must just find my presentation.
Must be, really.
Okay, good morning for everybody. It's great to see you all here. And I am Sara Maria Tikkanen from the Finnish Heritage Agency, and I work there especially with the Maritime and underwater cultural heritage, and I have been done that for about 25 years, so I think that sometimes I feel that I'm kind of dinosaurs already. Okay, then for my presentation.
You have not been excavated so far. Okay, great.
Yes. So I would like to start with this kind of blue planet issues. I think there you can see some kind of wordings which are probably familiar for you from different seminars and conferences and also from different types of publications. And there's a lot of blue thing, that and that going on a global level. And also heritage is there on board. We can, for example, talk about blue history, etc., etc. And I think we are very happy that we can agree that we really live the time of the blue planet at the moment, for example. Okay, and then there is also a growing need on a global level for different types of blue data, whatever it is, nature data or shipping data or oil drilling data. And also there is a growing need for maritime and underwater cultural heritage data. It is, for example, needed for the maritime spatial planning, and it is also needed for the European Landscape Convention, because we really think that the European Landscape Convention can be applied for the underwater spaces also. And the data is needed also for the forthcoming UNESCO Ocean Science Decade, as Arturo also talked about. Also, there is the need for maritime and underwater cultural heritage data. And also, the European Council Faro Convention, it is about the value of cultural heritage for the society, and it is also about the participant, how the citizens can participate in that heritage. And also for that, we need different types of maritime and underwater cultural heritage. And we have the underwater stakeholders, the divers, for example. Okay, then something about underwater cultural heritage in the Baltic Sea region. On the global level, the Baltic Sea region, the Baltic Sea is called often a treasure trove of underwater cultural heritage. And one reason for that is that we have great preservation conditions in the Baltic Sea. It is really cold and dark down there under the water, under the surface of the sea. And this all makes actually that we have different types of underwater sites, for example, certainly shipwrecks, almost intact shipwrecks, and then sunken Stone Age settlement sites, and also different types of historical harbors and many different types of man-made structures underwater there. And in the Baltic Sea region, we have collected the so-called the 100 list, and on that list we have listed 100 most interesting underwater sites located in the Baltic Sea region. And I think that we can really call the Baltic Sea region also an underwater museum, and it is just waiting for us to be visited there. And it is actually kind of an amazing thing that almost every year we have different types of new shipwreck discoveries, so we really have still the feeling of wondering. We still have the feeling of discovering new sites. And here you can see the main page of our Baltic Rim project. As Matthias already told, the main goal of the Baltic Rim project is to integrate maritime and underwater cultural heritage to the ongoing maritime spatial planning in Europe, for example. And certainly we have also many other types of teams. We are working with blue growth, sustainable diving tourism, for example, and cross-border areas and cross-border cooperation. And then we have also worked with the underwater landscape, with the idea of underwater landscape, and in different countries we have also done underwater fieldwork, and that has been very important to have more information regarding the underwater sites. And then we have also opened so-called Baltic Rim wiki page to work with the definition of underwater cultural heritage. And on this map you can see the partner countries and also the associated organization and the location of those institutions participating in the Baltic Rim project. Okay, we started our work in the Baltic Rim with the data issues, and from our website it is possible to find, for example, this data accessibility template. And in the template it is possible to find that how the heritage data is found from the different Baltic Rim partner countries. Some of the countries which are marked with dark green color on the map, they have open access data and they have map services. And the data is distributed via interfaces. And in some countries, the heritage data is not open at the internet, for example, but then it is possible to have that data in different forms in more traditional archival forms. And those countries on the map are with lighter green who don't have that open access data. And then we have also worked with different types of heritage categories with the national registers, and this has been quite an important, and in the beginning we hope to have more unified categories in the different registers. And when we made the analysis regarding this register, we noticed that all of the countries have certainly a category like a wreck or a burial site. But then we were actually a little bit surprised of that none of the countries had a category called a ship trap. And a ship trap is a site with several accidental losses of ships in one area. And that is quite a common underwater cultural heritage phenomenon, but none of the countries had that category in their registers. And yes, it is also very clear that there is no reason or it is not necessary to unify the registers because there is a long history of different administration and management behind those registers and behind the different categories in the registers. But this information is also possible to find from our webpage. And pretty soon we shall open our Baltic Rim data portal on our website. And from the data portal, it is possible then to find, for example, this type of different maps exercises. And on the map, on the left side, you can see that density map of different types of underwater sites in the whole Baltic Sea region. The darker the blue color is, the more on that spot there are underwater sites. And in the middle, it is possible to see with those red color, those areas which are most potentials to find sunken stone age settlements because of the different changes on the sea level in the Baltic Sea region. And on that last map, it is possible to see some of the coastal and maritime World Heritage Sites and maritime museums in the Baltic Sea region, and also some of the underwater parks and underwater trail sites. And then a little bit more about the maps exercises. We have also worked with the possible threats, and on this map it is possible to see the intensity of the bottom trawling in the southern Baltic. And certainly bottom trawling is a threat for the underwater cultural heritage. Basically most of the development projects and other sectors are at some level a threat for the underwater cultural heritage. But with the communication and discussion with the other sectors or using statement systems from the heritage agency, it is possible to avoid the risk pretty well. Then something about multi-use and cultural heritage. We have also worked with this team, and certainly one of the best combinations for multi-use is the protection of heritage, the protection of nature, and sustainable heritage, sustainable tourism heritage, for example. And it is quite clear that our cultural heritage can be used, but it should not be consumed. And certainly multi-use is very beneficial when it is managed well. And for example, from the Museums Project website, it is possible to find more detailed information regarding different types of multi-use options, whatever it is, heritage sector or some other sector. And yes, one of our important mission was the idea of underwater landscape, how to define the underwater landscape. From our website, you can find our toolkit for the underwater landscape, and there is also the definition for maritime cultural heritage and also what is an underwater landscape. And Mari already told about those emotions and feelings, what there is for the different types of spaces and locations in the coastal and marine and also in the underwater areas. And we have the underwater stakeholders, the divers, and they really experience that underwater space, that underwater world. So that is also important for MSP, and those underwater areas, those underwater spaces, they already have spatial location, so there is not necessary to find kind of spatial idea of the underwater landscape. Yes, this underwater landscape is very important, and we hope that at some level it could be considered also in the maritime spatial planning in different countries. And we also involved our underwater stakeholder for the definition of underwater landscape. There was a questionnaire for the divers. What is an underwater landscape? How do you experience it? And what does it mean for you? Then about the country examples, I couldn't take all the Baltic Rim countries for this presentation, but I have a couple of countries. Okay, first Poland. In Poland, the heritage registers are not open at the internet, but there are other forms to register on the underwater sites. But anyway, in Poland, underwater cultural heritage and maritime cultural heritage is seen as a full-scale sea use. That is very important. And in Poland, there will be some areas for the cultural heritage on the Polish MSP plans. And there will be also kind of areas to develop, for example, diving tourism. And that diving tourism is exactly something for the MSP, for the blue growth aims, for example. And then Estonia. I picked it up from Estonia Maritime Spatial Plan, the idea of marine culture. That is kind of concept which is very attractive for me, especially because it combines new uses of marine space and also the traditional uses of marine space. And that is connected, for example, for the sailing, for the diving, and for the traditional fishing, and for surfing and whatever. So it is a very nice concept for a wider perspective. What is maritime and underwater cultural heritage? That is a very nice concept. And in Estonian MSP, they did a cultural mapping of the Estonian coast and marine areas, and it was quite evident that all the areas were at some level important for the communities and also for the protection of cultural heritage. In the Estonian Maritime Spatial Planning, there will be not specific areas for cultural heritage, but there will be thematic maps and also regulation how to treat and how to work with underwater and maritime cultural heritage. And already Mari told something about Finnish Maritime Spatial Planning, and I will add something about the role of our agency. We have really a kind of double role, or should I say triple role, because our agency, we are one of the stakeholders in the Finnish Maritime Spatial Planning, but we have also an official role as an authority to protect heritage, whatever it is, underwater heritage or maritime cultural heritage. So we are involved also on that level as an authority. And then we are certainly also a partner in the Baltic Rim project. And then Sweden is not a Baltic Rim country, but anyway, in our project, we aim to have a pan-Baltic holistic view of the maritime spatial planning situation. And for example, in the Sweden, also heritage is one of the sectors in the maritime spatial planning, and they have designed a key for culture, for cultural areas, for example. And in the written version of the draft of MSP in Sweden, they also mentioned the idea of open sea landscape and how important it is also to protect the open sea landscape, the landscape where you can't see any type of man-made structures, for example. That is also very vital question, how to protect the above water landscape also. And in Sweden, they have also discussed about different types of multi-uses, and for example, heritage nature is again a good combination for multi-use, and also the combination of military heritage and nature. And in the Swedish documents, also our Baltic Rim was mentioned, so that is a great thing certainly for us. And yes, how about our initial findings? So certainly it is very important that in the MSP process, cultural heritage is seen as one important sector, and it is also important to have very early stage capacity building and discussions with the heritage authors and with the MSP planners, for example. And certainly it is easy for the planners if the heritage data is open access data with map services, for example. And because it seems that in most of the MSP plans, it is not possible to have special areas for cultural heritage because of the small scale of cultural heritage sites and phenomena. But anyway, then it is very important to guarantee the protection of maritime and underwater cultural heritage in a way or another, to set the rules and to set the guidelines and so on. Yes, and then it's interesting how to have those intangible values and the idea for underwater landscape on the maritime spatial plans. And the problem, what it comes for the underwater cultural heritage, is especially that for the exclusive economic zone, most of the countries don't have heritage legislation to protect the underwater cultural heritage. And then I would like to have actually a little bit more the idea of the 3D idea of the water pillar, because most of the plans are mainly made visible on the horizontal level, but not on the vertical level. And anyway, we all know that there is the 3D idea of the water pillar. Something for the future, we aim to produce MCH MSP toolbox to be available at our website, and this is for the future, and actually we should finalize this toolbox idea already in 2020, which is the last year for our project. And then a little bit advertising. Welcome to Finland, to the city of Kotka. In May 2020, we shall organize kind of stakeholder event in Kotka, and that will include certainly presentation and lectures and workshops and a site visit for the very famous Ruotsinsalmi Seapatila area, and also a visit to the Finnish Maritime Museum situated in Kotka. So welcome to Kotka, and see you later there. Okay, thank you.
Thank you a lot, Salamaria. So I understand that Kotka will be not only full of discussion, but also full of experience.
Yes.
Great. So now I would like to invite our panelists here. Salamaria, please come. Arturo, Maria, please come, because we want to discuss a little bit, but I want also to invite Matthias, because we want to have now discussion between those people who are expert in, and they have experience in maritime and culture, maritime culture, I would say, and those who are responsible for spatial planning. So I would say that we have here Finnish experience, and now we will ask also Polish experience. So Magda, who was responsible for planning in Poland, I mean, for the process of drafting of the plan. Okay, so we have those people who can discuss from both sides. And we have some questions. And now, I want to be very traditional now. So it means that those questions, yes, they are on Slido, definitely, but they are also, I will ask them orally. And I would be very happy to have you from the audience, you know, to somehow to be engaged in a discussion of our panel. So the questions are simple, which means that, okay, yes, here. The first one is, you know, about the essence of including this cultural heritage to the MSP. That's very important, because we had a very, very rich presentations now, you know, showing from cultural emotions to those very traditional thinking on the wrecks. So this is the first question to you. I would like Matthias to start. You know, you learn something from us, from planners. So how you feel now, how it's to include maritime cultural heritage in the MSP? Perhaps it's mission impossible, I don't know. I mean, please share your ideas with us.
Well, thank you. I don't think it's mission impossible. I think you as maritime spatial planners have a lot of experience already in integrating very many different sectors. So why shouldn't it work with cultural heritage? And I think there are lots of instruments there already. When I listen to the presentations and panel on EBA or other approaches, I think you can use them all. But of course there are needs for other instruments, and of course for specificalities that are have to be seen in context with cultural heritage. I mean, we heard a lot already in the presentations, of course, that you have to use and make available all data there is, or actually on cultural heritage, maritime cultural heritage. But I think there is more to that, and especially on the side of planners, that you really have to more integrate, more take into consideration cultural heritage in your spatial plans. And we saw, of course, that in many spatial plannings there is already cultural heritage as a theme, as a use, but that's probably not just enough. There needs to be policies, how to really preserve, maintain, and of course use cultural heritage in a sustainable way, so that we can have this resource, this asset, these values also in the future. And in my opinion, I think there is a need to actually designate areas, zones. We have the problem as archaeologists or cultural heritage managers that we often use, as we saw actually, only single find spots, wrecks. But as was also explained, we have to think more in a wider sense of landscapes. So because as on land, all these finds, all these objects are not actually separated from their surrounding. They are integrated also in a natural surrounding with natural features and the different layers of history. And that applies on land as in the sea. So I think we should really think more in this kind of spatial dimension also as cultural heritage managers, and find ways to designate zones and areas. And I think there are instruments like the culturally significant areas, like the underwater landscape, like the seascape ideas. And I think we should really use them, give good practice, and how to integrate them into spatial plans. Because I think even though we know that you can always expect a wreck somewhere or something beneath actually even the seabed, it helps you a lot if you see on the maps where the hotspots are, where the places are that are most significant, that are most vulnerable, of course. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthias. But I must say, from my perspective, we are talking now a little bit about the usual suspects, those wrecks and things like that. So I want to ask Sala Maria, because, I was really inspired when I tried to go through all the Baltic Rim materials. And for example, innovation for me, it was not only this cultural heritage, because this was somehow done previously, this emotional issues. But what was new for me, it was, this sea-land interface. That you said in Baltic Rim that it's so important to look holistically, also what is on the land and how the sea planning is influencing this on the land. Can you, because I want to see all those diverse dimensions of culture, which should be. So Rex, definitely yes. Landscape, it's a new word, great. Sala Maria, you want to add something? What are the, these various dimensions of culture that should be taken?
Is very important, and that should be considered also in the maritime space and planning. And actually always when I'm working with underwater cultural heritage, for example, when I'm writing statements regarding, for example, some development project, I'm looking also what there is on the dry land side, because probably that whatever it has been on the dry land side, a shipbuilding site or a timber factory or whatever, there might be some remains also underwater, and they have needed actually the water space for transportation or for what other types of purposes. So it is always very important to consider and to see the land-sea interaction and the area as one land, and to get rid of the idea that the surface of the water is some kind of border for human activities. So it is always on both sides of that surface, of that level. There is the same phenomenon. There are traces of that phenomenon. So land-sea interactions, and to getting rid of the idea of the level of surface of the surface, that it could be some kind of border for the landscape, for example. So there are almost always those underwater values also.
Well,
yes, I wanted to comment on that, okay, we have shipwrecks, we have landscapes, and you were asking about all the cultural heritage values. And yesterday I made a comment in another of the sessions about cultural values that they have invisibility, that doesn't have any material culture that remained. I worked in a project in Madagascar, in Saint Maria Island, some time ago, especially with local communities, to see exactly what type of heritage or what for them was important in the landscape, in the seascape. And for instance, there were some areas that for them, they were sacred. Areas where they didn't go to fish, they didn't do anything. For them, traditionally, from generations, those areas were already protected. They were called taboo areas, let's say. And what happened, I mean, you made questions for them, those areas is where some ancestors of the communities died years ago. Sometimes when you go there, you don't have any archaeological materials. Sometimes you have some archaeological materials linked to fishing, especially. But the way, I mean, maritime spatial planning is taking place, and the development of activities in those communities, in those seascapes, are putting in danger all this heritage that is being traditionally into the society. So we have to also take into consideration this intangible cultural heritage of the way communities are seeing the seascape itself. That for us, with our Western mentality, we go there and say, I mean, there is nothing here really. But through the vision of the traditional communities, for them is all. Everything out there is culture, and it belongs to the identity or the way they define themselves. So I wanted to highlight this importance of identity.
Because, you know, you are a global expert. I am a planner, but I have read what was in Scrigno, and there was very interesting idea from France, you know, showing that if you engage more local institutions for promoting this cultural heritage on the seas, this can have an effect of local community development. So can you imagine how we planners, through proper maritime spatial planning, we can boost this local development somehow if we properly address this complexity of culture in our plans?
As you say, I mean, it's a big and complex thing. Obviously, I mean, many places you have to involve communities. We were saying in a session yesterday about the participatory role of societies and the local stakeholders, and to have their opinion and to know what they think. Obviously, it has to be a two-way conversation and dialogue, bottom-up and top-down dialogue to see, because I mean you have the country with all the infrastructures, and then you have the local industries, the local concerns, and how industry can be somehow boosted. Obviously, I mean how that is done is through dialogue, through getting networks together and seeing the possibilities of developing economical, sustainable industries, and that's why most of the literature on cultural heritage and maritime and coastal in MSPs talks about tourism itself. I mean, it's one of the lines, obviously, but it's not the only one, because some of the other heritage may not be defined as heritage by the community itself, but it's something that they don't want to lose or they don't want to use as an economical resource. So how to manage all that, it also depends when you are. You have to do it case by case. Obviously, it may be easier in France than doing it in Saint Maria Island in Madagascar, I mean, to join, because obviously you have different dialogues. It comes to mind a case in Titicaca Lake in which we were involved in UNESCO with all the communities around in the part of Bolivia. There were indigenous communities with their own beliefs, with much more ambient ways of seeing the landscape. And there are many different archaeological sites there. They have a kind of MSP between Peru and Bolivia for the uses of the Titicaca Lake, and the culture was slowly inserted. The way of doing it was having meetings with each one of the local communities during a long period of time with experts, especially from the University of Brussels, having a dialogue, getting confidence, and getting to know what is important for them. Nowadays, they are developing the first museum, floating museum, sustainable, with tourists and going underwater in the sites that are sacred for them, but it's the same communities that are involved in the museum itself and taking the tourists in a sustainable way, let's say, I mean.
You should give it during our presentation. Okay, Maria, look on the screen, because here you have about the history. And have you, have you followed this idea that the sea has history in your research you have done in Finland, how it was?
Yeah. Well, yes and no. First, I would like to comment from the MSP approach in a way that we see the maritime cultural heritage as the essence of the humanity. So it's something that we can't separate from the MSP whenever we approach this thing. And we have this understanding that the wider public, the locals, they have this cultural heritage in their everyday life. They meet it in every actions they do, and they are the best expertise of their own life. And when we talk about how we collect the data and what data is important, it's we easily talk about for indigenous people, for example, and we think that they have some kind of ownership to the things, and we have to take consideration of what they think. Yes, we do have to do that, but all people have a need to be recognized at some level, because we have a very strong emotional bonds to places that are important for us. We don't have the emotions if we don't care, but when we care, we have the kind of the essence of the conflict, the forthcoming conflict is in there. So we have to also in the MSP to take consideration of all the emotions and all locals, what they feel when they are in a coast area or sea area. And that is, I just wanted to underline that the maritime cultural heritage is everywhere. And we have to have methods to map that. And when we come to the historical approach, it tells where we came from. And now we are looking forward to the future. And we have future scenarios. And that is something now we are building something historical at this point. So just wanted to say that there is not some kind of starting point or ending point, but this is the continuum, and we have to take it into consideration. I don't know what you think in Poland, but it's actually a bit tricky task to consider this.
Yeah, exactly. So we can move to the second question.
The data, sorry.
Yeah, we can move to the second. It's very great.
To underline that.
Go.
It's very vague in a way to take it over. And
so Magda will tell you what she thinks in Poland, and then you will come back and comment her. Okay, so go to the second question. Now whether MSP is ready to take this complexity into consideration. Yeah, go. Magda. And Maria, critical comments.
After today's session, I'm overwhelmed with the new information, and I'm always thinking, why when we started...
I am down.
Yeah, the same with me. So my only question is why when we started MSP in Poland, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, why we were thinking only about the wrecks and underwater objects, and not about this variety of the other concept like culturally significant areas or emotionally significant areas and so on. Of course, we can quarrel whether the emotionally significant areas are really. This is what my problem is as a planner. Whether it's really an emotionally significant area, it's really a. It depends very much on the level of awareness of society and how they perceive their emotions and so on, so on. So it's something very difficult to grasp and put into the planning. And I think that we have to look at the MSP as those two things, like the process, MSP planning, and then I think the most important is to have this dialogue, to put all those concepts on board and talk about them. Are those emotionally valuable areas really cultural and so on? So this dialogue is very important, and it's very important to have culture, sorry to say it, heritage people on board to discuss it with other sectors, because I also think that in case of Poland, the heritage sector is quite weak in a sense of awareness among the other sectors and among the society. So we rather think about the heritage as a resource like protected species, which are rather hampering development of communes and so on. But we have to change this attitude also, and this is something we have to discuss with society and other topics. Another problem for me, and which is, I don't know whether we are ready, the plan as a document, as an instrument. So we have the discussion and then we end up with a plan, and what we have in this plan, that's the problem, because it also depends on the country, on the legislations, how you can really include. So like in a plan, like Polish plan, which is encompassing the whole Polish sea areas, it's difficult to put any zoning, archaeological zoning, so you have to put regulations. And then what kind of regulations? Because you have to follow also the cultural heritage regulations which are already there. So is MSP capable of creating a new regulations additional to, and that's up to all the countries. So
we are excusing ourselves, sorry. Because
yeah, no, I'm excusing myself.
Yeah, we are excusing, but yeah, looking at this Finnish experience, I am so impressed.
I know.
So the question is why? Why is it?
I don't know why. I mean, this is
just
a I don't know why. Maybe we are not prepared to accommodate those cultural heritage in our plan. I have no idea why.
Okay.
I think in Polish case, we've been too much pinned by the legislation. So that's why at the end, I mean, the discussion was great. We could have the discussion, but when we created the plan, we had to delete some of the great ideas because and I think that there's still, of course, the scale of the plan. Now there is a chance to include it better because we will have the more detailed plans like Gulf of Gdańsk, and it's full of cultural heritage, we know, which is very problematic because we have cultural heritage and development of some really heavy industry, which is in conflict. And I think also we will have, and that's my last sentence, we will, it was a kind, because we are talking about this society's attributes. Puck Bay, in Polish case, it's full of potential cultural heritage of these paleo remainings and medieval ports and so on. So this is really a wonderful area to be protected and to be used by the communes, but the communes don't want to use this cultural heritage value because they think that they will hamper their development because they want to have other sources like tourism and so on. So this is also a challenge of maritime special planning to have this discussion.
Okay, so Maria, a comment. Tell why you have so different approach. Why you have started with this cultural thing, and then of course, Matthias, you are a boss. Yeah.
Yeah.
Want?
Have to say first that I agree that it's all about the process in a way, because we plan for the stakeholders with the stakeholders, and you are one of our stakeholders. Why we did that? You are referring to the heat maps, I think, and what we
yeah exactly,
because we had resources.
Yeah,
that's a very simple answer to that, because we had a possibility to do something differently, and we had this one regional council and the Satakunta region where we did this survey, and we had a possibility to kind of try whether we can collect the data we can use.
But it was from region or it was from Salamaria? Who was the initiator?
It was your project.
Yeah, it was my project.
Your?
In a way.
Planners.
In the regional council, Satakunta was a partner in this project, Baltic project, and we could utilize this new approach. We know that people have done this before. It's not something so novel in a way, but still. What I think it was, maybe what's novel was the emotional things, because a very specific question about whether you find any cultural, natural values. It's simple, people have asked that before, and we actually find out that the local level stakeholders, local knowledge, it was actually basically the same we already have. The experts knew this beforehand, and it was about the shipwrecks and the fortresses and lighthouses and all that kind of stuff that they connected to the family trips, or they had memories about. So nothing new. But what is new is the emotional maps, in a way, and then we can have an understanding how important these things are and how many cultural issues we can find from the emotional issues. Yeah.
Okay, Matthias, you wanted to comment? Because we are running out of time.
Yeah, just briefly to what Magda said. I mean, you pointed to an issue, indeed, that yeah, maybe in some countries the cultural heritage institutions are rather strong, but that's not the case in all the places. And I know we in Germany have the same problem. There is no German cultural heritage agency, so we are quite fragmented there. Also means we have some very let's say, weak institution when it comes to capacity and personnel and all that. So it is also on us, actually, to develop this capacity, to develop instruments, to develop knowledge, to give to you planners. And not only that you planners come to us to ask for these information. So we have there a challenge as well. And I think this is one thing, of course, the Baltic Rim project is trying to mitigate and to develop actually this knowledge and spread it. And the other question is how to deal with the local communities. And yes, I mean, also as cultural heritage managers, we have to talk to people. There's no protection of cultural heritage, there's no sustainable use of cultural heritage without the people. So that is something we have to do anyway. And MSP or spatial planning in general clearly shows that if we are to designate areas, be it multi-use or whatever, protection areas, priority areas, we have to make people aware that this is not only about hampering development, but also about giving new values to areas and providing new ways of developing areas. So I think this is quite an important aspect we experience in our everyday work.
Okay, we are running out of time. Arturo, no, okay, so at least you can acknowledge that Baltic perhaps is not perfect, but is very open-minded. Okay.
No, I didn't. When I wanted to make a small overview of my experience of the world, obviously I didn't mention the Baltic because it's the place where all the leading initiatives are coming from. No? So I mean, all the models and things that are happening here in the future will shape probably all the models somewhere else. So it's important to look into what is happening really in this area.
The Baltic, custom is that we will open discussion for you. It's not only speaking heads. So now, who wants to tell something? You can comment, because we had those two questions. It seems that it's tricky issue. Still, we need the dialogue. That's clear. But if you want to tell something from your own experience, how you feel it, what's your emotional bond to the issue of cultural heritage? So please go ahead, if you wish. Anybody now? It's We have micros. Kira is managing micro now, so she can share. Yeah.
Okay, well, I can make a start maybe.
Yeah.
I think it's been a really great session and very, very encouraging, actually, to see so many different approaches and innovations, I suppose, coming to MSP in terms of including cultural heritage. I was also taken by the diverse interpretation of what cultural heritage is or can be. Yeah. And I think it's very important to bear that in mind, that we're talking about material and immaterial and the connections that heritage has to what we do today. The sort of, ongoing idea that, you come from the past to the present to the future, I thought is extremely valuable. Of course, there's still the challenge, how do we deal with that in MSP in a way that does justice to both material and immaterial heritage, which may also be a question of scale. It may be a question of the type of MSP that one is doing. I can see that maybe regional or local MSP processes might find it, I won't say easier, but it's maybe more, logical. I don't know, it may be different somehow to include local communities into a regional MSP plan like you're doing in Finland compared to something that is more strategic and national, ? And I was also intrigued of how do we, once we've identified emotional connections to the sea, how do we then take the next step? Because then the question is, how do we weigh that in the context of other challenges, of other demands that are placed on the sea, and how much consideration can you really give a culturally significant area which has, come about because of a strong sense of place, for example, against something like offshore wind farming, which is also a justified use and an opportunity. So how do you then strike a balance in the greater context of MSP decisions? It's more of a very broad comment, not a question.
Anybody else? If not, yeah, because, yeah, okay.
Can I have one?
Yeah.
It's me. Hello, it's me.
You can always.
Okay, so I have just, one example from Slido, which is quite interesting for me, at least, because I was always thinking about the cultural heritage in terms of historical and this medieval. But here is an example of Paguro, the gas offshore platform, which is an industrial underwater cultural heritage site, which sank in 1965 in Northern Atlantic. And it's now managed as a Natura 2000 site with rich biodiversity, and is co-managed by Diver Association, which help to monitor and control. So this is something which is also our future. So all those industrial places not connected with the harbor and with the coastal historical ports, but this new industry in the sea, which will in 100 time become a culturally historical heritage. And this is also a challenge, I think, how to, I was surprised that this is, I don't know who wrote it, but...
Emiliano, of course.
Okay, so that, I was just...
That's clear.
I was just curious whether this industrial underwater cultural heritage site it's just your feeling, or it's really it really has.
Okay,
such
we must stop. But I have a proposal. We'll take all Baltic planner to this Paguro, whatever, and they will spend 2 days there, and then they will change their opinion about the importance of cultural heritage. Definitely, it's a good idea as a solution from our workshop. So I think that Mariana can put it to the notes. That we invite, Emiliano invites all those planners from Baltic there. Okay, great. So thank you very much for this session. Sorry for being late, and thank you for our panelists.